So greetings, hello, it's Dr. Thomas Daffern speaking, and it's the 2nd of May. So I hope everyone had a great Beltane celebration, and it's a beautiful time of year, and today I'm recording a special talk, a lecture in honour of Leonardo da Vinci again, because this was the day on which he died 500 years ago in 1519. And I'm going to start by explaining a little bit about Leonardo's life and death, and then what my Peace Institute is doing to commemorate this important 500-year anniversary. So in 1519, Leonardo was living at Amboise, not far from here, on the Loire Valley. And last year we had a conference to celebrate his life and thought, and we gave lectures, and you can watch them, they're all recorded. I don't think they're all posted yet. My talk is mainly there. And it was a lovely experience here. And then the next day I went on pilgrimage to Amboise, which I'd never been to before, and visited this amazing castle where his patron, King Francis I, had lived, and other kings of France and queens had lived there before him. It's an extraordinary location overlooking the Loire Valley. I do strongly recommend, if people have a chance to go there, do so, because you learn so much about French history, and indeed European history. It was an important base for the French monarchy, and Leonardo was the greatest artist and intellectual thinker about art, because he was a philosopher as well as a mere technician. He was a multi-talented person, a musician, a playwright, a storyteller, a scientist, and an engineer, and many of his inventions are made in full-scale models. They're at the museum in Amboise, which is in the little, huge manor house called Clos Luce, which is just about a mile from the castle. So the king gave him the use of this amazing huge manor house, which is an extraordinary place, which is now a preserved museum in honour of Leonardo da Vinci, and I strongly recommend people to visit. My own daughter went recently. It has full-scale models in the basement, and it shows a glimpse into the polymathic character of his nature. All he did was as a way of giving thanks to God. He was a deeply spiritual man, Leonardo. He loved life, he loved embodiment, he loved colour, he loved sight. That's why he was a painter. He was a lover of beauty. He loved women, so much he wanted to paint them in their full beauty and mysteriousness, like the famous Mona Lisa, which he actually brought with him from Italy, and it's now in the Louvre. It's one of the most famous paintings in the world, obviously. And he carried it all the way on horseback when they travelled from Italy to come and live here. He died 3 years after his arrival. I mean, it's tragic. And when he died, the legend, the story, and I think it's historical, is that the king was actually with him, King Francis I. There's a painting made of this deathbed scene. I went to the room where it happened. The bed is, there, and you can imagine it in your mind's eye. And as he was dying, Leonardo apparently started crying, and tears coming down his cheeks, and the king said, well, why are you crying? Like, you're going to heaven, you're a good man, you've done great works. And he'd taken the sacraments. He was a Christian who believed in the message of the Gospels, that A, there's a life after death, and B, that if you do good, you kind of go to a better place. So it wasn't because of that he was crying. No, he said to the king, he said, I've wasted my time. I was given all these talents by God, and what have I done? I've frittered them away. I've done a few paintings. I've built a few maquettes. What else? I've wasted my life. And I'm feeling like there's so much else to do. Why am I dying now? It's too early. I've still got loads more to do. And his tears were frustration that he was dying with everything unaccomplished. Now, my talk today is called Leonardo's Tears because I want to home in on that moment, that microsecond of exchange between Leonardo and the king, and say that is the human condition. We're all going to die with those tears, if we're honest to ourselves. Life and death are poised in a fine balance, both collectively and individually. I mean, I have dear friends that have that have died on me. I have a whole list of my great teachers and fellow scholars and so on that are now dead. I can hardly believe it really, but they are. And that's why I think it's so precious when people are alive to give them honour and thanks and to show gratitude to the living. We have a strange thing in life that we tend to honour the dead. We make people saints when they're dead, and not enough when people are alive. Anyway, Leonardo was one of those fecund geniuses whose thought traversed many different fields, and that was the condition of the Renaissance mind. Now it's given us it's taken us hundreds of years to begin to implement the vision of people like Leonardo, the great Renaissance thinkers at that time. We're still playing catch up to, actually. And I, as a scholar of comparative religion and philosophy, my most profound interest in the Renaissance legacy is the spiritual synthesis that they were working on. Leonardo moved in circles in Florence and elsewhere with very intellectual Catholic and universal thinkers in the best sense of the term Catholic, which is to be a universal thinker. They were searching for universal truth, and his colleagues and friends attached to the Florentine Academy, founded by the Medici family, they were looking to integrate and unite all possible sources of wisdom. And for them, it wasn't a question of, this is orthodox, this is heretical, this is to be read, this is not. It was a question of what wisdom can this text or this teaching or that tradition shed on the human condition. And so Leonardo, in his library, had books from Islamic sources. He'd studied deeply the Islamic mathematical and astronomical and scientific treatises. Islam had done amazing work on advancing science and providing, the number system that we were using in Europe at that time. Leonardo was a great mathematician as well, and drew on mathematics from the Arabic and Islamic sources. He also was interested in the Kabbalah, and I have other colleagues and friends who are working on Leonardo's knowledge of Jewish mystical esotericism, and he encoded into some of his paintings some of that knowledge. The basic teaching being there's a kind of divine intelligence, there's a pattern or symmetry behind reality, which the sage or scholar or mystic or seer or artist or druid, whatever word you want to use, can access through their mind's eye. And then, the whole thing is not just a mathematical display, but also a conceptual, a theological display. Ultimately, the world is a creation of the divine intelligence, and our duty is to give praise to that and give thanks through our own co-creativity. So, as whatever, writers, poets, musicians, builders, engineers, architects, web designers, whatever that creative work is that we can do. That's our way of giving thanks. And that's what Leonardo was saying. He knew that God's grace is so enormous. I mean, he grew up in the hills outside Florence in Vinci, a little town, where he was really happy running in the fields. And at this time of year in May, it's the countryside in Europe, in Italy, and here in central France is just full of flowers, wild flowers. The whole thing is like a picture, and so he grew up enchanted by that sense of beauty, which he tried to paint in his paintings. Of course, no artist can do justice to reality, and he's buried. When I went to Amboise, I went to his death place, the bedside scene, and then his tomb, which is in a chapel in the grounds of the castle at Amboise. dedicated to St. Hubert. It's a beautiful little chapel, and there's a great plaque in the floor where his body is, laid to rest, and it has a long history there. You should go to it and see for yourself. In prayer there, I was communing with his spirit, so to say, and asked him, what can we do? I'm merely a peace academic, but I know your problem, Leonardo. When I die, I will weep tears for all that I've not finished. My mission, my my goal is to bring world peace. It's a very simple mission. It's partly an academic job. It's an aesthetic thing. I think the world is very ugly when it's in violence. I've just been reading the biography of Eleanor Roosevelt, a great American stateswoman who was the wife of probably one of America's greatest presidents, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was a Democrat in the Democratic Party, but more importantly, he was a Democrat in his soul. He believed in human potential and human genius. And he knew that extreme capitalism, which had led to the Depression, stunts people. When you're that poor, you can't manifest your full genius. I mean, Leonardo knew times of poverty. He wasn't born and brought up in a wealthy background because he was actually born illegitimate. His father wouldn't acknowledge him officially, and it was born of a love romance in the summer meadows between a beautiful local village girl, and this somewhat sophisticated lawyer from Florence, Leonardo's father. And it was one of those storybook romances, but the hard-headed businessman, the father, wasn't prepared to actually marry this girl. He already was planning a sort of society wedding. So Leonardo was brought up in the country, in the environs of the mother, and only later, when he was a late teen, was he allowed to come into Florence and live there. And the father did a decent thing. He arranged for his son to have an education as an artist. He attached him to a famous painter's studio in Florence, who was also a goldsmith. And that's where Leonardo learned his craft as a painter. And that was thanks to his father. So thanks, Dad, But, so Leonardo knew what it was like to be poor, and so did the Roosevelts. And that's why they launched the New Deal. Now, everybody's now talking about a Green New Deal. And I'm also, so far as I know, I don't know who coined this term, but I certainly helped coin it. I was calling for this some months ago, and now everybody seems to be calling for it. The Spanish socialists just got elected on this basis of a Green New Deal. Well, let's have one, please, and think it through. As an eco-philosopher, I've been thinking about this for a long time. But the original New Deal of the Roosevelts it was ultimately a metaphysical thing. It was to give people their own right to their own self-worth, their own dignity. My friend, Dr. Evelyn Lindner, wonderful woman of Norway, a psychologist, has launched this international commission of inquiry into lack of dignity and humiliation, which always seems to accompany violence. People like to humiliate each other. It's completely terrible. I don't, I'm sure you don't, but there are people out there that get off on humiliating others. It's a pathology. It needs studying medically, and that's what Dr. Lindau has done. Lindner. And, she's doing very important work. So the economic system we have, and we had it in a lot of human history, sometimes worse when there was slavery and so on, is premised on humiliating others and keeping them poor. What the Green New Deal has to do is liberate the potential within us all. Every child, as an educator I know, I've taught thousands of kids in my time, and young adults and teenagers and graduate students, and I've taught at all levels of education, and I know that every child in front of me is a potential genius. They are all Leonardos, and it's just a question of finding what it is that is their unique genius. Now, somebody will be great at sports, that's their unique genius. Somebody will be great at cartography, geography, they'll fall in love with maps and want to explore the world. Some people will get into ecology and studying the incredible balance of nature. They'll have a genius for that. They'll go out in the fields and collect wildflowers and so on. Others might have a genius for studying obscure religious texts and want to become a scholar of religions. etc., etc. Everybody has got something incredible, and some might just love sitting at the piano and improvising and becoming a musician. Our job as teachers and educators is to enable the genius within every one of the 6 billion people on this planet to be fully realised. That to me is the Green New Deal. Okay, now when I look at countries around the world, a lot of them, the population is mainly young. The population of the people of Palestine is mostly, it's young people. These are children that are looking to us, the elders, for guidance on how to release that genius within them. And whether you're Israeli or Palestinian or Yemeni or Shiite or Sunni or Jewish or Christian or Catholic or Protestant, this is a universal question. That's what the Roosevelts knew, and in launching that New Deal, and his wife helped him enormously. Franklin, was given the proper support that a wife should give to have the courage to stand up against the political opposition. It seems to me that everything that Trump stands for, the republicanism that he comes from on the hard right, is the complete antithesis to what the Roosevelts stood for. And it's very interesting, there's a passage in Roosevelt's biography where she says, she's talking about American politics in her day, and she says, God, it would be terrible if a businessman ever took over government. They would have the wrong models, they would misapply their business strategy to running government, whereas government is such a more subtle thing, and you have to do it with the consent and support of people. You have to engage with people at their level and talk with them as an equal. You have to find out their needs and concerns. It's the complete opposite to what Trump stands for. He's applying this business model, which is actually seems to be a fake business model. There's now evidence from his, bank records that are going to be released. Although he's trying to stop that in court. I mean, typical businessman. He sues you if you dare to ask the truth. And yet his day will come. He will be rumbled, and that. But the important thing is not just getting rid of Trump. It's rejecting that entire model of politics and governance. Governance is an art, it's not a business. The business model is fundamentally corrupt because it applies a profit motive in its more extreme capitalist formulation. It is only interested in profit and for one's own company or one's own self. And that inevitably leads to clashes with the popular needs and the environmental needs of society as a whole. Now, the Roosevelts knew that, and that's what they meant by the New Deal. So that has to be incorporated into the Green New Deal. What I want as the icing on the cake, and what Leonardo's vision, I think, stands for, and I saw this in a blinding flash of kind of, waking upness when I was visiting his grave last year, and now we're on the 500th anniversary of his death, is that the reason the world is in such poverty at the moment and turmoil and conflict is because we're still investing in militarism as a planet. Our big mistake is to think that spending money on militarism is going to bring us peace. We have incredibly sophisticated technical know-how now to make precision bombs and drones and nuclear weapons. I mean, Leonardo would be amazed at the complexity of our weaponry. He was an engineer who invented some military equipment. He was forced to work for Cesare Borgia, who was one of the great warlords of the day, and he worked for the Sforza, Duke of Milan, who was another military figure, and he ended up working for Francis I, who was also a military figure, although not a very good one. He was captured by the Spanish. But so Leonardo was forced to, as it were, prostitute his intellectual and artistic and technical knowledge to the military industry of his day. So many young people are having to do that now. And because it's the most economically secure career. If I'd have been an inventor of weapons, I would live in a huge palace and have millions in the bank, as they do. Well, I think that's totally wrong as a philosopher and as an artist of human beauty, as a poet and a lover of the aesthetics of life. Why is it that we're investing in Thanatos, the death instinct? There are military industrial arms sales going on all over the planet with millions and millions of pounds of goods being sold. My country, the United Kingdom, is peddling itself as a weapons font. You know, we need a Green New Deal for the British economy where we're completely not reliant on the military-industrial economy. The Scots don't want nuclear weapons in Scotland anymore. They are going to get independence and get rid of them. We have to wake up to the fact that that old way of doing things is no longer viable. Instead of creating yet new nuclear weapons, as Trump, the businessman, has started the hair racing, he's torn up his country's nuclear weapons disarmament treaty with Iran, and he's also torn up the treaty with Russia that is the foundation of international stability and order. And he's raised the firing gun on new arms race. He's got all the kind of arms technicians and inventors in the USA now saying we're going to make new weapons of bombs that can destroy Moscow in 30 milliseconds. And the Russians are following suit. Putin announced just recently with chagrin, remorse, because he's not someone that wanted to do this, I can assure you, that because the Americans have now torn up that hugely important arms treaty that was signed by Thatcher and Reagan and Gorbachev, which is the foundation of peace and stability in the Cold War world. It brought an end to the Cold War in 1990, the Treaty of Paris. And, you know, that this businessman, Trump, can somehow seize power through, you know, the misuse of data and through electioneering campaign lies, basically. I mean, I read something that Trump issued 10,000 lies since his, you know, even I think since he came into power. I'm proposing that politicians should be forced by law to tell the truth, you know. And here's a man who's told 10,000 lies still in power. I find it absolutely incredible that the world is not doing something about this. I'm merely a teacher and a scholar. I'm just pointing out the absurdity of this situation. So what I've suggested as the Leonardo Da Vinci Peace Prize is thinking through from the Roosevelt perspective, you know, and I strongly recommend you read Eleanor's autobiography. It's a masterpiece. The problem is the Pentagon itself, and it's a huge five-sided building near Washington, D.C., on the Potomac River, and it houses more personnel. I think there's about 10,000 people work there, all of whom are dedicated to militarism. They're like the military elite of the planet. And they run the biggest budget. It's that building has got the biggest outlay of expenditure anywhere on the planet. What does it spend it on? Purely militarism. Creating new weapons, military research, military intelligence, training the army, the navy, the air force, and all the other kind of black ops groups and God knows what, you know. Its mission is, you know, control, conquer, and destroy. And its only way of dealing with complex political problems is like organise a coup, like in Venezuela, or drop bombs on it, like in Libya. Militarism has always been unsubtle. It's a stupid thing, and it's a very caveman type response to a problem. Is, you know, fight. As a Druid, as a peacemaker, as a philosopher, as a Jain, as a person dedicated to non-violence, we have to activate the higher levels of human awareness and human consciousness, right? And what I'm proposing the Leonardo Da Vinci Peace Prize is going to be awarded to whoever, as an architect or architectural firm, designs a top floor to sit atop the Pentagon. Literally, because it's not a high building. You know, we can build a second floor exactly as tall as the first one, with its 5 inner stories, which would be dedicated to peacemaking, mediation. It would house a new Department of Peace for the USA people. If Roosevelt was alive, you know, they would sign that immediately. Yes, here's whatever. I mean, the military budget is so vast that only a small proportion of that would be needed to build that building. And I'm proposing, as a Canadian citizen, obviously I'm not a US citizen, so I can't vote in this, but I'm saying to my American colleagues, organise, you know, the remnants of true Democrats who are left in the USA, the inheritors of Roosevelt's original vision of a New Deal, people that want a Green New Deal, all the people that are protesting the mad business type, you know, philosophy of the Trump era, You see, the businessman actually wants violence and conflict and destabilisation because war is good for business. That's the old slogan. And, well, it's not good for society, it's not good for human beings, and it's not good for the planet. War is the single biggest user up of Earth's resources and the single biggest pumper out of carbon emissions, causing, climate change. So the Extinction Rebellion people need to realise that the peace element of their Green New Deal is going to be the fundamental clincher to make sure the whole thing happens. If we can cap that Pentagon with the spirit of Leonardo's invention, and it would be a wonderful architectural design to put a peace structure on top of the Pentagon symbolically, and have a roof garden and have fountains and have all the greatest thinkers in the US and from around the world dedicated to peacemaking. Now, there is so much expertise. I've been to the US, I did a study tour. I've spoken a couple of times at the UN headquarters. I'm an expert for my PhD in studies on the history of peace thinking. And America's full of it. They have expertise in mediation, in conflict prevention, in communication, in non-violent discourse, in all kinds of peace theory. John Burton, one of the greatest scholars of conflict resolution, conflict analysis, set up a centre at George Mason University, which is just down the road from Washington. There are academic centres of great expertise. There's Notre Dame in the US, where they have expertise on the theology of peace. There's tremendous work going on. So all these experts, I think, could work. They could sort of revitalise the Peace Corps that Kennedy founded, which Eleanor Roosevelt speaks very highly of, and really, peace could be the greatest gift that the US should be giving to mankind. Everyone says the democratic world looks to America for leadership. Well, we don't look to it for just bombing campaigns. We don't look to it for military business, mass destruction of our hopes and dreams. And the poor people of Yemen, who are either Shia or Sunni, instead of dropping bombs on one side and taking sides with the Sunni world of Saudi Arabia against the Shia world of Iran and their friends, the US would be strictly neutral, as would be the European Union and Britain and all the other powers. My view is that if we want a peaceful Middle East, the West has to disengage with all sides, stop selling them weapons, immediately cut all arms sales to Middle East countries, and encourage peace talks, genuine, from a neutral, genuine perspective, as the Oslo peace talks were. And on the matter of Sunni and Shia kind of conflict, which the West has somehow been hijacked into supporting the extremist Sunni position of the Wahhabis. Well, no, there needs to be a total change of foreign policy approach in the US and in Britain and Europe, whereby we are equally committed to Shia and Sunni sides of Islam in order to bring them together in peace. I mean, I as a scholar know that the Shias and the Sunnis have amazing bits of truth in their interpretations of Islam. Neither of them has a total monopoly. It's a kind of war going on among rival business clans who they want a monopoly of wisdom. Well, no, that business model of knowledge is non-scholarly, it's pre-scientific. In post the Enlightenment, post Leibniz, Spinoza, Bacon, and Descartes and the European Enlightenment, we need a different model of knowledge, which is cooperation. That's called science. I share what I know, you share what you know, we share what he knows, we do tests and we work out what the truth is. That applies also in the spiritual sciences, the human sciences, the humanities, as well as in the empirical material sciences, physics and so on. So, I want to share a couple of quotes then, moving on from that. How can we stop Leonardo crying? How can we stop those tears? Because in heaven, I'm sure he's still crying. He's thinking, my God, that European Enlightenment, that wonderful Renaissance I was part of, we helped create America. Look, it's named after my friend Amerigo de Vespucci, who was also involved in the Florentine Academy. And what are they doing? They're just building bigger and bigger weapons that could blow up the entire world. Somebody stop them. Well, I'm helping in my own little way by announcing the Peace Prize, which I'm happy to work with architects and architectural award structures and like the Royal Institute of Architects and so on in Britain, and their equivalent in all countries. I'd like all the main architectural professional bodies around the world to engage with me and to come up with the design plans for a top floor of the Pentagon, and obviously the American one is the key thing there. Because architecture is a science that is on the side of civilization, is on the side of history, and is on the side of peace. And so if we can do that, like put an Institute of Peace up on the top of the Pentagon, people will thank us for that for the next 1,000 years or the next 500 years. Like we're still commemorating Leonardo, right? One of the things that Department of Peace would do is it would fund peace studies. It would fund thinking in universities, just as the Pentagon on the floors below is funding military research and war research, and give 10 million to Harvard Department of Science to come up with new weapons, or give loads of money to MIT to come up with some new robotic warfare stuff. Well, the people on the top floor of the Pentagon would be giving money to Harvard or Cambridge or Oxford or wherever around the world to come up with peace theory and peace praxis. And I mean, it's sometimes not completely dissimilar. I mean, I have a proposal that the sort of thing they would fund is what I call the peace tank. So in situations of actual border clashes and conflict, like was happening in the horrible Bosnia-Herzegovina civil wars around Sarajevo and elsewhere, when there's actually troops fighting in the front line against each other, you would have this thing that you would helicopter in. I call it the peace tank. It would be it could be a converted tank vehicle or something that looks a bit like a tank, and it doesn't have any guns on it. It's made of bomb-proof metal, so it's safe to go in, and you helicopter it into the front line between the two opposing forces. It would be under a UN flag. You would do this, so it would have the UN insignia on it and so on. And it would have been agreed at a truce. So the two sides have been negotiated to have a truce. They helicopter in the peace vehicle, and inside it, it's not huge, but there's a kind of mini cinema and a mini conference room. And what you do is you allow in in two shifts the leaders of the one faction, Party A, and then they get to watch a movie. And the movie is in two halves. The movie has been commissioned by, again, funded by the Department of Peace, made by the greatest movie directors in contemporary the world. So Spielberg would be the overall director. It would be full of special effects. It would be full of great music. It'd be like a Hollywood blockbuster film for an hour. And that would tell the horrors of all wars. It would include original footage from the concentration camps, from Hiroshima, the victims, from World War I, the trenches, the absurd, obscenity of skulls peeking out of the ground. It would include the firebombing of Dresden. It would include war crimes committed by all sides in war. It would include, etc., etc. It would tell that war is seriously a tragedy. And it would then have footage of the arsenals of the world, that are stockpiled, the military, nuclear, industrial stuff.